Look, I opened this jar of rotten baby food, and well, a butterfly came out.
So I did a little research on this one too. um, so I actually did look up a lot about like court jesters back in the day, and was this a common practice of court jesters being killed?
No pre-show
No pre-show,
because
no pre-show preamble.
no
Yeah,
preamble, no pre-show because this is the Comedians and Elevators podcast, and I've got my guest Matthew Glover. Matthew, say hi, introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
what's going on? My name is Matthew Glover. I'm a voice actor out of Florida. I've done a bunch of odd and end jobs, and voiceover is my passion, so that's kind of what I'm sticking with.
All right, nice. Well, you ready to get into it, Matthew?
Yeah, let's do it.
Listen, to my regular listeners, I know you don't like when at the beginning of these conversations I ask you to subscribe. None of us like it. I don't like saying it. I don't like it being in here. But it's frustrating. You know what else is frustrating? It's also frustrating when I look in the back end of the YouTube channel and I see that 56% of you that watch frequently haven't yet subscribed. And I know this because I see it in the comment section. You say things like, I didn't know I didn't subscribe. And that's actually what fuels the show. Basically, it's like you're making a donation to the show. So that's why I ask all the time, because it enables us to build and build and build. And we're going for the long term here. Hit the subscribe button and we'll continue to build this show for you. That's my promise. Thank you to all you guys that do subscribe. It means the world to me. All right, so the whole point of the podcast is to compare and contrast the comic versus the comedian. So I define the comic as any person telling funny jokes versus the comedian who's a funny person telling any jokes. So, Matthew, would you agree that you start as a comic and evolve into a comedian?
So I actually did a lot of research. I actually watched a lot of your, well, not a lot. I watched like 3 or 4 episodes of your
Nice.
podcast, and I was like, where is he getting this dichotomy of comic versus comedian? Where is he getting it from? And because in my mind, as not a comedian, because I'm not a comedian, I don't consider myself a comedian, or a comic. Where is he getting this idea from? Because to me they're synonymous. It's like the same, like you said it in some of your podcasts that it's the same coin, just different sides. But
Right.
to me, it's almost like interchangeable terms,
Mhm.
And so I was like, well, where is he getting this? Where is he getting this separation from? And so I did run across. It was funny because today I was watching, doing my normal constitutionals, going through TikTok and stuff, and
Were you on the toilet while doing it, or is that just
yeah, I was trying to keep your show clean, and I said
oh,
constitutionals.
fair
No
enough.
poop jokes. No poop jokes in this one. Um, but I came across a clip of a juggler. I can't remember his name, but he was a juggler, and he was saying that, and he brought up that famous quote from uh who was it? Milton Berle,
Hmm.
and he was saying, that there's comics who are, and how do you define it? Comics are
They're anybody telling jokes.
anybody telling jokes, and then you have comedians, which are funny people
Right.
saying things. And then there's even
Telling jokes.
there's even a clip out there of John Levitz, and he says, I'm a comedian, I'm a funny person who says things.
Right.
And then he was talking to Bill Burr, and he was called Bill Burr. You're a comic. You are a person that says funny things. Where I'm funny and I could say whatever and it's funny.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, so I could see where in the professional realm of comedy, you have this dichotomy
And
of comic.
that's where it came from my perspective. That's why I even came up like, what? Yeah, you're right. How would I come up with this? I
Yeah.
didn't. It's from the doing stand up that I was introduced to this idea, mainly by promoters and club owners that have more. They wanted it to be more focused, and they want you
Yeah.
to know exactly what you're doing and what they can expect from you. And
Right.
so that's where it came from.
Yeah. And so with that idea, I think that comedians are what evolve into comics and not the other way around. I think it's not a comic evolves into a comedian. I think a comedian, because a comedian, if a comedian is defined as somebody who says funny or somebody who is funny, who says
Right.
things, as Milton Berle said, uh, then that like because we could consider Tom Hanks, in his earlier career, he was a comedian. He did a lot of comedy movies, everything like that. But there was a movie that he did about a stand-up comic, and so he tried to get into the role, and he went and he did stand-up comedy, and he says it's not the same thing.
Right.
And he said it's a lot harder to be a comic, being coming from being a comedian to being a comic. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. So, what was your question again? I did that
No,
whole
no, no, that's excellent. Yeah, you definitely are justifying my existence by even doing any kind of research to figure that out. But I agree with you 100%. Because I would also agree. I would say that a lot of actors that are funny and they're
yeah.
comedians in that sense, and then they try and do stand up, and they're like, oh my god, the amount of structure and work and
Hmm.
all this stuff that you have to do to really keep it going on stage is not just being funny, right? When you
Yeah.
have a camera or with people and you're kind of you can do that, but yeah, most people like they from my experience, they try and be funny. So that
Yeah.
starts, so you're a comic, you're trying, you're focused, you're doing it. And then eventually you discover who you are as a funny person. So that's where I'm coming from with that.
I gotcha. Okay, okay, okay. Yeah. So another way I was thinking about this too, before my epiphany on the toilet this morning, was
The Constitution. Were you
yeah,
reading
my
the Constitution
constitutional,
or?
yeah. No, I wasn't reading the Constitution. But was because I was thinking about this when you first invited me on your show, because I was like, well, I'm not a comedian, so what can I even offer this conversation? And but I was thinking about comics, and because I was thinking about like some people like Jimmy Fallon and Jay Leno and people like this, and a lot of people don't find them particularly funny, but they tell funny. They're given funny jokes to tell, and so
Right.
they are comics. But
They
then you
are,
have comedians like Bill. I think Bill Burr is a great comedian. I think he's a funny person, even though he has his shtick that he does on stage. Um, and then people like, but then you also have comics that are like Jeff Acuri. He's one of my favorite comics right now, and he is his comic style or his comedy style is very much he's a funny person, but he does still tell funny jokes. And so it's almost like, and I think that's where I was kind of having a trouble with this dichotomy, because I think
right.
you can have that in between where you kind of become, the tip of the triangle, and you meet and you become Jesus on the mountain of transfiguration, and you are both a comic and comedian.
You're hitting it right there. So
Beady, 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 beady.
I would, in this context, I would put Bill Burr, Jay Leno, and a lot of the
Comic.
night guys uh, as they have a comedic character, and that's why they are in the role that they're in. Like Bill Burr, he has that's his sound,
Yeah.
how he inflects is the comedic character,
Right.
but is that part is that a comedy within itself? No, I would say it's not. He has to do all the work, to tell the
To
jokes,
be,
and
yeah,
then
to be funny, to become funny.
to, exactly, and then the kind of the style is his personification, and I would say that's the same with Jay Leno and a lot of the nighttime
Yeah.
shows.
Yeah. Because I don't find a lot of I personally don't find a lot of them funny. And to belabor the point, I think we've kind of hit it a lot, but like to belabor the point, a lot of people uh consider like Robin Williams, the
Hmm.
late great Robin Williams, I actually don't find his stand-up funny, but I think that Robin Williams is a funny person. And I
Hmm.
think that's what carried him through stand-up comedy and a lot of his impersonations and things like that. That's what carried him, I think. And I could be wrong. A lot of people are probably going to think that I'm, an idiot for saying all that. But I don't, I wasn't a fan of his stand-up comedy, but I love watching Robin Williams in movies.
Hmm.
When he his interviews, I love watching his interviews. I think he's just a genuinely funny person. But as far
Right.
as his stand-up is concerned, like I wasn't really a fan because it was so sporadic. It was so crazy. A person that reminds me of him right now is Casey Rocket. Like I'm like I don't like Casey Rocket's not funny to me, but a lot of people find him funny, and I think it's just that style.
Yeah. Well, I would say that with Robin Williams, I would say that his comedic character is so refined and consistent that the
Hmm.
jokes don't meet. your expectation. Like they don't,
That's
they're
true.
subpar, right? So you're hearing this, it's like it's not there yet, right? He has
Yeah.
to do a lot more work for such a professional, refined comedian. Why are the jokes kind of, yeah,
Yeah.
chaos? Maybe they're not flat because he's making it not flat, but they're actually not that particularly funny.
Right.
So, all right. So, how about the role of persona in comedy? So, how much of the comedian's voice is a character versus the real self?
Yeah. And we were talking about this a little bit,
Yeah.
but so you know, I was thinking about this question, and I was thinking about people like Bobcat Williams, right? Isn't that his name, Bobcat Williams? Is it?
Cat Williams?
No, no,
I
no,
don't think it's
Bobcat.
Bobcat.
No, the
Bobcat
guy. No, no,
Williams.
no, 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 no. The guy who
Oh,
was like the guy. Hey, sounding like this. That guy.
Cat Williams?
No, no,
No.
no, 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 no.
Woke? He's got the woke thing
No,
going
no, no,
on?
no, no. You're gonna
Oh,
force
man.
me to
I,
Google. Hold on.
I
You're gonna
know because
force me
it's
to.
so close. It's where how we
No,
can.
no, 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 no. Because Cat Williams is Cat Williams. Like I know who
Right.
Cat Williams is. This is Bobcat Gold.
Oh,
Bobcat Gold. Goldthwait. Bobcat
oh.
Goldthwait. A really popular in like the 80s.
Right.
you know. But he had this persona of like, my name, and he did this thing, and people loved him.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you heard him really talk, it's the same thing with Gilbert Godfrey.
Right.
Everybody thinks Gilbert Godfrey has that voice. It's like, no, if you've ever hear him talk normally, you would be floored. But that was the persona he put on. So
Right.
I think it's really just depends on what comedic style you want. Do you want to put on that persona, or do you want to be like a what you uh what am I trying the word I'm trying to think of is like what you show people is like who you are. Like I'm just being who I am. Like I feel like Jeff Akiri is very much like I think that's how he is off the stage. I could be wrong because I don't know Jeff Akiri, but he seems like a pretty genuine dude. You brought up Bill Burr, and I think you are right. I think Bill Burr, but I think part of that is his character. I think he takes himself and he amps himself up to like 11, and
Right.
that's his character, but it's still him. It's
Mm.
still a genuine representation of him. um Robin Williams, I think, is another great example of somebody that takes probably themselves and just ramps it up to dials it to 11, and that's their comic persona. So I think
Right.
that persona is it's either you're making an entirely different persona for the stage, which is in the case of like Gilbert Gottfried and Bobcat Goldthwait. And even there's a new guy uh, who does what's his name? It's like Tony Dice or something like that. No, it's not Tony Dice. It's not Dice, but they compare him to that guy. But he comes on stage and he's like, hey, he does the whole thing.
Mm.
But when you see him like do an interview, he's a completely different person. So there's that, but then you also have the Jeff Curies, you have the Robin Williams and the Bill Burrs, who I think that their persona is themselves, but just dialed up to 11. So I think persona does have a lot to do with it because you're not going to you're not going to promote your complete self on the stage because you have to, you know, if you've ever heard the saying that people are like diamonds, you have different facets of your life that you
Mm-hmm.
show to people. And I think comics will say, this is my funny side. Comics and comedians will say, this is my funny side. I'm going to show you my funny side, but I'm not going to show you like my deep self.
Well, if you're amping it up, you're actually not going deep, you're going higher, right? And I could
Right.
see maybe that's the problem with these particular comedians is that the jokes are not amped up high enough to match their characters, right? And so that's why it seems like they're not funny because if you're at an 11 as a character and your joke is a 5 or even a 10, it's not an
Yeah.
11,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, and that's what I like about like I keep coming back to Jeffrey Curie because he's my favorite comic right now. I just love him. But his jokes are actually kind of uh the way he tells jokes is very mellow, but it very much seems like uh a
Is it
uh
very
I'm gonna
Jesselneck?
no 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 I'm gonna do this a lot where I forget the word that I'm trying to say. Genuine.
That's
Like
genuine.
it
Yeah.
seems like he's being very genuine when he's on the stage, and this is just the dude that he is, and he's just a funny guy with some funny jokes.
So then does authenticity matter or is illusion
I
part of
think
the
it
magic?
I think it can be either or. That's this conversation really isn't about it's not about complete opposites and dichotomies, but it like you say, it's two sides of the same coin, but sometimes, that coin is more like a diamond where you have multiple facets, and you can still see multiple facets from one side, but the other side hides other facets. So I think that's kind of more of what we're dealing with, which is, you can still have some of that authenticity show while still putting forward the persona.
So you've transformed my dichotomy into polar radial
Yes.
geometry.
Yes.
All right. Now you've studied too much of the podcast. You know too much of the questions. So let's see if you can be
Sorry,
authentic
throw a
and
curveball at
pretend.
me.
No, I will, but not yet. I'm gonna
Okay.
ask this question, and you got to pretend like you've never heard it before.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Punching up versus punching down. Where
Oh
do
man, I
comics?
haven't thought of this question at all. Oh man, this one's you're throwing me for
There
a
we go.
loop.
Well, here we go. So, where do comics versus comedians stand on this? And let me put it in some historical context. Did a jealous medieval prince become the first comedian by killing the court jester?
Okay. So um so I did a little research on this one too. Um But so I actually did look up a lot about like court jesters back in the day, and was this a common practice of court jesters being killed, and so forth. And it actually, even though the threat of violence was on the life of a lot of court jesters were actually given a pass on most nobility, so they were able to kind of be that commentary on society, with some you know like hey, don't go for the king or go for the prince, and so on and so forth. And there's actually a really funny there's a story. I can't remember the name of the jester, but he slapped the butt of the king, and the king was gonna like kill him. But then the court jester was like, oh, I'm sorry, my liege, I thought you were the queen. And there was actually a law out that no court jesters could make fun of the queen, and so he was going to have him killed anyway. And then the king said, well, for your wittiness, being able to think on your toes like that, I'll let you decide how you're going to die. And so the court jester decided to die of old age. And the king, again, thinking, oh, that's smart. What I'll do is I'll exile you then from the kingdom, and you'll no longer be a court jester. So I think that if you take that story of yours, where did the did the prince, by killing the court jester, like if your story were to be true, and this prince kills this court jester, did he in himself become or have the last laugh, or become a comic in and of himself? And I think in that particular case, no. I would equate that prince as almost like a heckler. Like
Right.
you almost ruined the joke. The court jester is funny and you got offended. And so I think the court jester would be still the comedian or comic in that case. But in the case of the court jester who was exiled, I think the king actually becomes the ultimate comic in that stage, because it's somebody who's not funny, who's saying something very funny. Like, well, in that case, if you want to die of old age, in that case, I'll just exile you, and then you can die of old age outside of the kingdom. I think that's pretty funny. Um, but punching up versus punching down. Um, I really think that has to do with the comedian, the comic, because there's a lot of comics that will punch down. And the way I think about punching down is making a joke uh, in spite of somebody, or not maybe not in spite of somebody, but like um, without that person's permission, without that person, being in on the joke or liking the joke, kind of thing. Like there's a clip of Shane Gillis out, and Shane Gillis does a lot of jokes about Down syndrome, because he has family members who have Down syndrome, and he's on the show with some other comics. I can't think of their names off the top of my head, but he's on their podcast, and they're making these jokes about people with Down syndrome. And Shane Gillis actually looks physically upset, and they're like, well, what's wrong, man? Why aren't you laughing with us? And he says, well, because you don't know how to do the jokes, and it's because you're making jokes in light of somebody. Like I am taking you and I'm making fun of you. That's punching down.
Hmm.
Where if punching up is I'm gonna take that joke and I'm gonna either come down with it myself, like it's like I'm no better, and so it's I guess that's the in light or in spite. Punching down is in light of you, and punching up is in spite of you. I think I'm
All
saying
right.
that correctly.
No, no, I agree with that one. But let's try this one. Okay, cultural translation of comedy. How do
Okay.
jokes that work in one country bomb in another?
Okay. This is one I haven't thought too much on, but I have thought about it. Um, so there is a comic that I like to watch. His name is Sunshine, and he actually does rakugo, uh, the Japanese comedy, and he does it for American audiences. So he's an American or he's a Canadian who went to Japan, learned Japanese, learned the art of rakugo. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Um, learned the art of rakugo, and then has now he tours the United States and he even tours Japan and stuff like that. And he does a lot of these Japanese jokes. And I think that the he does those jokes well because he introduces us to a lot of the tradition first. So he has a huge preamble of like, this is how Japanese culture is. Let me define this for you, and now let me tell you a joke. And I think he does really well with that. And so I think that if you can take your joke and culturalize it, I think you can make your joke universal. So I think that that's one thing about jokes because um, my one of my first jobs I worked at a warehouse and I worked with a lot of Spanish culture people, and I'm white. So I'm like this white
No,
guy.
wait a minute.
Hey, hey, but I'm this white guy working with a bunch of Spanish people, and they would tell jokes all the time, and they would laugh, and I would want to know, I would want to be on the in on the joke, and I'm like, hey, so what was the joke? And they were like, it wouldn't translate very well in English. And I was like, well, like just try. And so they would tell the joke, and I would still think it would be funny. So I think that as long as there's nothing that's like the cultural specific, I think that jokes can span, that divide.
And that's a good point that they haven't translated. They don't recognize that because they're not trying to be funny, comedically, but they know
Yeah,
their joke is funny with them. So there is a little bit of a dissonance there when you try and analyze these jokes.
yeah,
So
yeah.
okay, so how different would it be if the same thing started looking now like it would not change if nothing else really did?
Okay, this is a new one. I don't think I got this far in your other podcast. If this is the same questions.
At
Uh,
least I got you on a new one.
all right, all
Let's
right, all
see.
right, all right. So let's so can you say
I
that one more
can,
time?
and I will, but this is only for you because how different would it be if the same thing started looking now like it would not change if nothing else really did?
I'm trying to understand that. I'm trying to wrap my head around that. So if you have something that looks like it's going to remain the same while everything else changed around it, what was the question of that again? Okay, it's the same thing. Everything else has changed around it. It remains the same.
So this is the reason. So you got lucky. I switched this question, and you just so
Okay,
happen to be the right person that would even attempt to understand what this is. But
okay,
what it actually is nonsensical. It is nonsensical
okay,
on purpose, right? And
okay,
so I'm just, and this is the reason why I'm even putting this in there is because I knew somebody was going to start studying these. The podcast and know every single possible thing I was going to say. So I'm
okay,
throwing in this is a major curveball. So
okay, okay.
so yeah,
Do you want
I
me to
mean,
try to answer the question, or is it
I,
like
I'm
this?
I am
This
super
question is
curious.
complete and utter nonsense. Don't even try.
Well, let's see. You actually got 75% through it, and you were
Okay.
tracking till the end. So I'll do it again. How different would it be if the same thing started looking now like it would not change if nothing else really did?
Okay. So yeah. So I think hmm. I'm trying to think of something that we could equate this to. And I think there are examples, but I'm trying to think of one. Um, I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. Um, because there's a saying, if I could bring up the Bible, there's a saying in the Bible that's like there's nothing new under the sun. So there are a lot of things that we encounter throughout the day, throughout our lives that are the same, and they've remained the same while everything else around them changes. And so
Right.
like communication has really stayed the same, but what has evolved is how we communicate to people, like the mode of communication. Transportation is pretty much the same thing. We're going from point A to point B, or wherever we want to go, but the mode of transportation has changed around us. So, what would it look like? I think that's the way it would look is we would still have these things that are the same, but the way that we experience them would be different. I think that's what we would experience.
Awesome. I mean, the fact that you got this far, I had no idea it was going to happen, but I knew I had to do something because you were eventually going to show up or somebody like you and know every single question I was going to ask before I did. So and you still answered it. This is
Bam,
amazing.
nailed it.
You know, I guess I'm going to have to just not try and be that creative with new questions. So
Well,
we'll
the
just
way
go.
I approach this because a lot of I watch the one your podcast that I did watch, a lot of those guests were trying to answer those questions as if they had an actual answer for them. Where me, I always have conversations this way, whereas like I don't have a whole lot of answers, but I love the discussion of it. Let's find
Right.
the answer together. And so, like that last question isn't me trying to come up with a right answer. It's me trying to like, well, let's hash this thing out. Let's talk about it.
Right.
I'm very much a philosopher at heart. I love
100%. There's no way you are not by even indulging in such a question, knowing as I defined it as nonsensical and still attempted, which is awesome.
yes.
You do know where it comes from, where the idea of this question comes from, right?
No,
Being
no.
being intention, it isn't. I didn't come up with it. It is intentionally nonsensical. It's
Okay.
used for, yeah, it's used on purpose as a kind of a dissociative tactic for interrogations.
Oh. So what's the purpose of that question though? What
No,
like
that's
is
it.
this
It's just to dissociate you for interrogation purposes.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, I'm reaching that I'm throwing stuff like this in here just to see, and you nailed it out of the park. So next time
So
you're,
I would be great at interrogation.
well, being interrogated, hopefully you're not guilty. You'll just be like, yeah, I know what you're doing.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
All right. Very important question. Advertising and self-promotion. Who advertises themselves more? Well, wait for it. The comic, the comedian, or the magician. You know that place where you're not conscious and you're not sleeping either? That's your power bill to the electric company. Right here. I want us to be here with free energy, where the Wardenclyffe Tower meets the Eiffel Tower. But that's not where we are. We are here, where you've got the utility and you've got residential solar. Between these two, we know which one saves you money. This is where we can go in the meantime. But this is where I want us to be now, and this can be done now. So let me deputize you to represent DOSE, Department of Solar Efficiency, and let's get on the podcast and get the message out today. See you soon.
Okay. So I think that everyone has to promote themselves. We're talking about self-promotion, we're talking about promotion all together.
I mean, either way, I mean, sometimes you get other people to do it for you, of course.
Okay. Because I mean, like if we're talking about comics and we're talking about comics like, we've already made the example of like Jimmy Fallon and the late night comics. I mean, they're advertised all the time. You know, they're advertised on their networks because their networks want them to be seen because we're, more eyeballs, more eyeballs. And now comedians are out on TikTok. That's how a lot of the name drops that I've been doing this whole show. I've seen them from TikTok, like Sunshine, who does the Rakugo. A lot of
Mhm.
his stuff I've seen on Instagram. Jeff Akuri is all over Instagram and TikTok. Matt Rife, he's all over TikTok and Instagram, even though some people don't find him funny. I don't really find Matt Rife a whole very funny.
Well, I mean, he does mostly crowd work. I don't see too much
Yeah,
crafted work.
yeah. Well, a lot of the stuff I see on TikTok and stuff from all comedians are crowd work. And what I've heard is that they do that specifically so because the jokes are always going to be the same. So they don't
Right.
want to bore you with all their jokes. that you don't want to come to the show. However, I haven't seen Matt Rife's Netflix special. However, I have heard that it's all it is crowd work from the beginning to end. And that's what makes it bad.
Yes.
But again, that's self-promotion. Matt Rife did a huge campaign on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and became this huge star where he got his own Netflix special. So I
Right.
think that, and then magicians, I don't see a whole lot of magicians
Ah,
doing
you're not watching enough Netflix.
promotion. I'm not watching. Well, when I watch Netflix, I usually watch like Ed Gein, those things. But I have seen some magicians on TikTok and Instagram, but again, most of my stuff is related to voice acting, and still have a lot of comedians and stuff on there too. So I haven't seen a whole lot of promotion from magicians, but I would assume that's out there. And so I think that all of them do. Probably, I think that comics being the way that we've defined comics versus comedians, I feel like comedians are more grassrootsy self-promotion, so they're doing a lot of their own stuff. Where comics, I feel like, are more corporatized, and so they might have a lot more backing. So they probably do more advertising that way through like your traditional commercial avenues, where your comedians are now going through TikTok and Instagram and all these grassrootsy movements and stuff.
All right. Matthew, are you ready to enter the multiverse?
Let's do it.
All right.
I want to see my other self.
The other facet. So,
The other
board
facet.
game, it is board game Zoomcast, play versus performance. If comedy were a board game Zoomcast, are you competing as the colorist, adding tone, mood, and shading, or the Foley artist, building punchlines with soundscapes and timing?
Now, is this me personally, what I would
Yes,
be, or if I was
you're
the
on the board
comedian?
game. Well, I mean, if you're in the elevator,
Right. Okay. Well, you put me in this elevator.
I mean, you stepped, I mean, I didn't force you in the elevator.
Okay, so colorist adds uh
Tone, mood, and shading.
okay, and then the
Foley
Foley
artist,
artist
building
is doing
punchlines with soundscapes and timing.
okay. I would say personally, I would go from the colorist route because I like moods more than I like making a point. I like building atmospheres more than I like uh preaching at people,
Sure.
instead of just saying, "Hey, here's the point, here's what you're supposed to get out of it." I want you to feel that and come to that conclusion yourself, where you would do that through mood and color, and color theory is a big huge thing with colorists and things
Hmm.
like that.
So, does comedy work better when it's painted vividly or when it's orchestrated sonically?
Um, orchestrated sonically, you mean is like it's to the point, and painted
Well,
vividly, your colorist.
I mean, I would argue that, painted vividly is the colorist. So, therefore, most
Okay.
likely,
Okay, so
orchestrated
let's
sonic.
go at it. Let's go at it this way. So sonically is sound, so
Right.
the Foley artist, and then colorist is the painter, that kind of thing. So I think it works better if as a colorist perspective. So if you're painting it vividly, that's what I think works more effectively than if you were just to bring the message straight forward.
Okay. All right, we'll go with that. Okay, so here in the Comedians in Elevators podcast, we
Uh-huh.
have a tradition where the previous guest asks a question for the next guest. And the
Okay.
previous guest was Joseph Walker. And his
Mhm.
question for you, Matthew, is how can comedy survive in these days and times?
I don't think there's a question of how can it survive. I think it will survive. Because comedy is just story. Comedy has been around since cavemen. You know that there's some cavemen, Ugin and Ogden out there, back in whatever BC, making a joke, and all the other cavemen are laughing. Comedy is so ancient that even the philosopher Aristotle, talked about it, and Plato talked about it, and you had uh entire worship services where these ancient Greeks would sacrifice goats in the name of tragedy and comedy. So I don't think it's a a question of how is it going to survive. I think it's just, I think it's that thing of it's the thing that remains constant, but everything around it changes. So
Hmm.
how are we going to experience it next? And I think right now the experience we're having with comedy is we feel like it's going to go away because we know, like free speech is being challenged, and I use
Hmm.
quotes. Free speech is being challenged, but the thing is I think that people are people sway back toward free speech because they want to be able to say whatever they want to say, whether it challenges society or not. And I think that that's always going to prevail. That's why we have books like Fahrenheit 451 is all about that. Like, no censorship. We don't want censorship, and I think that that's just human nature. So I think that that's going to survive. I think it's going to survive throughout the end of time. So it's not a question of how is it going to survive, but, how are we going to experience it later on?
All right. All right. Last question. Legacy. Who
Mhm.
gets remembered? Will the comics Type 5 survive time, or will the comedian's cultural point of view be more timeless?
Type five, you're saying like their jokes.
Like stand up, you have a 5 minute set.
I got you. I got you. I got you. Um, I, I think cultural point of view. And the reason I think that is because if we take another example, George Carlin, most people don't remember all of his exact jokes or his type fives, but a lot of people know exactly what George Carlin thought about society. And so I think that's gonna stand the test of time. That's gonna be the thing that people are remembered for. That's the legacy, is your impact on cultural or on culture and your idea of what culture was.
All right. So, Matthew, where can everybody find you online?
You can find me on Instagram, on TikTok, and on Facebook. Instagram and TikTok, I am mattnews.biz. On Facebook, you can find me on Matt Glover. A lot of my profile pictures are a puppet, a puppet version of me, but that's where you can find me on there.
All right. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for being my guest. And for everyone else, please like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.